AWS Solution Architect, Associate 2020. AWS Solution Architect Associate Chapter 1, AWS Service Overview Global Infrastructure, Regions. Service Areas, Compute, Storage, Databases, Migration, and Transfer, Network and Content Delivery, Developer Tools, Robotics, Blockchain, Satellite, Management, and Governance, Media Services, Machine Learning, Analytics, Security Identity, and Compliance, Mobile. R&VR, Application Integration, AWS Cost Management, Customer Engagement, Business Applications, Desktop and App Streaming, IoT, Game Development. Global Infrastructure, a region is geographical as in North America, Europe etc., with each having at least 2 availability zones. An availability zone is basically a data center, possibly several in close proximity. GovCloud is for government entities only. Edge locations are AWS endpoints used for caching content, typically CloudFront CDN. Owner in AWS is the identity and email address associated with the account. AWS Solution Architect Associate. Chapter 2, IAM. Identity Access Management allows setup of users groups, roles and permissions and policies to grant access to the AWS platform. Centralized control, shared access, granular permissions, identity federation, MFA, PCI DSS compliant. Policies are constructed with documents in JSON format. In IAM, the changes and settings are global rather than region-specific. Users, programmatic access enables access key ID and secret access key for AWS API, CLI, SDK and other dev tools. Access keys are generated by default, can be unselected. Users have no permissions when first created. When a programmatic user is first created, the key and secret are supplied, CSV can be downloaded. These details will never be shown again, so save them. If you fail to, or forget them, a new key and secret can be generated in the Security Credentials section of the user account. They are also stored in the AWS folder in User Home Directory in EC2 instance logged into. Possible security risk with Amazon recommending the use of roles. Group creation, AWS have many policies created by job function. You can also create custom policies. Access key ID and secret only allow programmatic access, not console login. How can you get notification if charges exceed a threshold? Set up a billing alarm under CloudWatch, which uses SNS topics to email you an alert if a threshold is crossed. AWS Solution Architect Associate. Chapter 3, S3. S3, Simple Storage Service. Safe place to store files, object-based storage spread across multiple devices and facilities. 5 TB maximum file size, unlimited storage. S3 buckets, basically folders. You are permitted 100 per account by default. Universal namespace, so bucket names must be globally unique. Your chosen name.s3.amazona.w.s.com, North Virginia, or your chosen name.region.amazona.w.s.com. S3 styles, virtual style puts your bucket name first, S3 second, and the region third. Path style puts S3 first and your bucket as a subdomain. Legacy global endpoint has no region. S3 static hosting can be your own domain or your bucket name first, S3 website second, followed by the region. AWS are in the process of phasing out path style, and support for legacy global endpoint format is limited and discouraged. However, it is still useful to be able to recognize them should they show up in. When you upload a file, you will get an HTTP 200 code back to confirm successful upload. Objects consist of key, the name, value, the data, version ID, for versioning, metadata, data about data, sub-resources like ACLs and torrents. Data consistency in S3. Read after write for new objects. As soon as an object is uploaded, it can be read. Eventual consistency for overwrite and delete, which takes some time to propagate. Updates to existing file or deletion take time to propagate, so you may not get the latest version right away. 99.99% availability, with 99.9% guaranteed. 11 nines guaranteed for durability, unlikely to be lost. S3 features tiered storage, lifecycle management, versioning, encryption, MFA on deletes, ACLs and bucket policies. S3 storage classes. Standard has 99.99% availability, 11 nines durability, stored redundantly across multiple devices in multiple facilities and designed to sustain the failure of two facilities concurrently. S3 YAR, infrequently accessed, used to be known as RRS reduced redundancy storage, has lower fees, but a retrieval fee, worthwhile for rarely used data. S3 One Zone, YAR, an even lower cost option for infrequently accessed data without the multiple availability zone resilience. S3 Intelligent Tiering, designed to optimize cost by automatically moving data to the most cost-effective tier based on usage. Latency is in the milliseconds for all classes outside of Glacier. S3 Glacier is for data archiving with retrieval times configurable from minutes to hours. Very cost-effective. S3 Glacier Deep Archive is the lowest cost storage class with a 12 hours retrieval time. S3 Charging, storage volume, number of requests, storage management, data transfer pricing, transfer acceleration, cross-region replication. Cross-region replication is the automatic replication of an S3 bucket from one region to another for availability and/or resilience. S3 Transfer Acceleration enables fast and easy transfer of files over long distances between users and S3 using CloudFront edge locations and routing over an optimized network path. Basically, users upload to edge, and the objects then use the Amazon backbone to get back to S3. You cannot install an OS or database on object-based storage, so no S3 for them. Read S3 facts. S3 buckets can only be deleted if empty. Bucket settings can be cloned from an existing when creating new. Versioning and server access logging can be enabled. Object-level logging also possible. Buckets are not publicly accessible by default. Permissions can be set using ACLs to buckets and the individual objects within them. Controlling access to buckets can be achieved with ACLs or policies. S3 Exam Tips. Buckets are a universal namespace. Uploads to S3 return an HTTP 200 success code. Tiers are S3, S3 YAR, S3 YAR One Zone, S3 Intelligent Tiering, Glacier, Glacier Deep Archive. S3 Pricing Tiers. The cost is made up of storage fees per gigabyte, requests and retrievals, data transfer, management and replication. Storage fees, S3 Standard $0.023/GB first 50 TB /month, next 450 TB $0.022/GB /month, over 500 TB $0.021/GB /month. S3 Intelligent Tiering is the same but adds YAR $0.0125/GB /month. But YAR has a $0.0025 per month management fee per 1,000 objects. S3 YAR is $0.0125/GB /month, S3 YAR One Zone is $0.01/GB /month. Glacier is $0.004/GB /month and Glacier Deep Archive is $0.00099/GB /month. Understand how to get the best value. Intelligent tiering is often a good answer unless you need Glacier or have a massive number of objects. S3 Security and Encryption. Encryption in transit is achieved with TLS/SSL. Encryption at rest is achieved by S3 managed keys, SSE-S3, AWS Key Managed Service, managed keys, SSE-KMS, or server-side encryption with customer-provided keys, SSEC client-side encryption also possible prior to S3 upload. S3 versioning. Once versioning has been enabled on a bucket, it cannot be disabled, only suspended. Versioning comes with MFA delete, and integrates with lifecycle rules. Uploading a new version of the file removes the public setting, so it will need re-enabling for access. Old versions remain public once set. Versioning can increase storage requirements significantly, depending on rate of change. Policies to remove old versions after a period of time may be wise. Deletion. With versions hidden, the deletion of a file places a delete marker on the file, which is just another version. Delete the version with the delete marker and the file is restored. With versions shown, deleting a file version will result in deletion. Versioning enables MFA delete for an additional layer of security. Lifecycle management with S3 automates the transition of objects between storage tiers or their expiration. Lifecycle rules can be applied to all objects in a bucket, or all objects with specified tags. Can be enabled for current version, previous versions, or both. AWS Organizations, an account management service that enables consolidation of multiple AWS accounts into an organization you create and centrally manage. Best practice is to use root for billing only, do not deploy any resources there. Use OUS off root to compartmentalize management and access. Consolidated billing helps reduce cost by aggregating all resources into one billing account. One bill per AWS account and volume pricing discounts. Once you create an organization, you can invite other AWS accounts to your organization by email or account ID, or create new accounts within your organization. Policies can be applied to OUs, service control policy, that restrict members of an OU from accessing services. Always enable MFA on the root account, and use a complex password. Root, paying, account should be used for billing only, no resources deployed to root. Sharing S3 buckets across accounts, 3 ways. Bucket policies and IAM, programmatic access only. Bucket ACLs and IAM, again programmatic access only. Or cross-account IAM roles, which will give programmatic and console access. Role can be created, pasting in the ID for another AWS account in accounts that can use this role. Grant necessary roles to the alternate AWS account. Cannot use the root account of the alternate AWS account, so additional users must exist. Use switch role to access resources permitted in other accounts. Cross-region replication requires versioning to be enabled on the source destination S3 bucket. Replication can be for the whole bucket or on prefix tags. It can be within a region or cross-region. Destination bucket can be created during replication setup, and access roles can be selected or defined during replication rule creation. Changes and additions post-replication setup are replicated, but any objects already in the bucket will need to be manually uploaded. Delete markers and deletions are not replicated. S3 transfer acceleration uses CloudFront edge networks to transfer files to S3 over the Amazon backbone. Upload URLs are distinct. Amazon have a tool that will compare direct upload speeds to the transfer acceleration service. CloudFront is a CDN, a system of distributed servers that delivers web content to users from a more local point than the originating system, which improves performance. Cached at edge locations, from origin in S3, EC2, load balancer or Route 53. A distribution is a collection of edge locations. First user consumes the content by downloading it from source, it is then cached at local edge location for a configured time. Subsequent users will pull the same content from the edge cache, until the cache TTL expires. Caches can be cleared, invalidating the cache, but this is chargeable. CloudFront is dynamic, and will automatically use the best locations for users. Web distribution is used for web content, RTMP is used for media streaming. Edge locations are not read-only, they can also be written to CS3 transfer acceleration. CloudFront is global, not regional. Can cache a bucket, or a folder within. Access can be restricted to signed URLs or cookies. WAFs can also be used to protect distributions. CloudFront distributions can take up to an hour to create, and must be disabled before they can be deleted, which can take 15 minutes to complete. A specific domain name is provided for CloudFront edge location. To remove from edge locations, create invalidations. An invalidation can remove specific files or folders, or everything. Invalidating will remove objects from edge locations, but incurs a charge. SnowBall is a petabyte-scale data transfer solution that can securely get data into or out of AWS S3. Gets around network costs, long transfer times and security concerns. Comes in 50 terabytes or 80 terabytes variants. Tamper-resistant enclosures, 256-bit encryption and TPM modules to ensure full chain of custody of data. Once transfer is complete, AWS performs software erasure of the SnowBall appliance. SnowBall Edge is a 100 terabytes device that has compute capability. It can be used for data transfer as above, but can also be used as local storage for remote or offline locations. SnowBall Edge devices can also be clustered together for local storage, with no need for cloud access. Snowmobile is an exabyte-scale data transfer service used to move massive amounts of data to AWS up to 100 petabytes per Snowmobile in a 45 feet ruggedized shipping container. Secure, fast and cost-effective. SnowBall transfer becomes desirable versus T3 transfer at 2 terabytes, versus 100 megabits per second transfer at 5 terabytes and versus 1 gigabit per second transfer at 60 terabytes. Storage Gateway connects on-prem software appliances with cloud-based storage to bridge on-prem and cloud. Storage Gateway can be virtual or physical as a VM, runs on VMware or Hyper-V. Once the gateway is associated with your AWS account, it can be configured in the management portal. Two types: File Gateway is NFS and SMB for file storage. Volume Gateway is ISCSI for stored and cached volumes, plus Tape Gateway, which is a virtual tape library. File Gateway enables the storage of objects in S3, accessible via NFS mount points. Once objects are in S3, they can be managed just like any other S3 object. Volume Gateway, stored volumes presents apps with disk volumes using the ISCSI block protocol. Data in these volumes can be backed up as snapshots of the volumes, and stored in the cloud as EBS snapshots. Snapshots are incremental backups that capture only changed blocks, and snapshot storage is compressed to minimize storage charges. A way to store virtual disks in the cloud. Stored volumes allow for storage of primary data locally, while backing up to AWS. Stored volumes are entire data sets, any changes are written locally and then backed up to S3. Cache volumes let you use S3 as your primary data storage whilst retaining frequently accessed data locally in the storage gateway. You can create volumes up to 32 terabytes and attach them as ISCSI devices to non-prem systems. The gateway stores data in S3 but retains recently read data in on-prem storage, 1 GB to 32 terabytes for cached volumes. Tape Gateway facilitates the archiving of data to AWS Cloud but storing data on virtual tape cartridges. Each tape gateway has a media changer and tape drives to enable client backup apps to connect via ISCSI. Supported by Net Backup, Backup Exec, Veeam and many others. Athena vs Macy. Athena is an interactive query service which allows the analysis of data in S3 using standard SQL in a serverless manner. Like turning S3 into a giant SQL DB. Charges are per query and by TB scanned. Athena can be used to query logs, generate business reports, analyze AWS cost and usage reports and run queries on clickstream data. Macy works on PII data, and is a security service that uses machine learning and NLP to discover, classify and protect sensitive data in S3. It uses AI to recognize sensitive data, has a dashboard, reports and alerts. It works directly in S3 and can also analyze CloudTrail logs. Very useful for PCI DSS compliance and for preventing identity theft. Amazon Athena supports a wide variety of data formats like CSV, TSV, JSON, or text files, and also supports open-source columnar formats such as Apache ORC and Apache Parquet. AWS Solution Architect Associate. Chapter 4, EC2. EC2, Elastic Compute Cloud, allows the rapid scaling of server infrastructure up or down in minutes, reducing timescales and CapEx. The EC2 hypervisor is built on Xen and Nitro. Pricing models, on demand, priced by the hour. Good for low cost and no upfront payment, no commitment. Also good for applications with short-term, spiky or unpredictable workloads that cannot be interrupted. Good for initial app testing on AWS. Reserved provides capacity reservation for 1 year or 3 years. The more you pay up front, the more you save. Good for steady state or predictable usage, apps that require reserved capacity, and users able to make upfront payments to reduce overall cost. Different types: standard reserved instances, up to 75% off depending on amount paid upfront. Convertible reserved instances allow types of instance to be changed. Scheduled reserved instances are good for boxing resources to specific timeframes. Spot instances are where AWS has spare capacity, prices are dropped to encourage use. Instances are taken away when prices go beyond your bid price. Good for apps that have flexible start and end times, apps that need very low cost and users that have an urgent need for large amounts of compute capacity. If the instance is terminated by Amazon, you will not be charged for a partial hour of usage. If you terminate the instance, you will be charged for any hour in which the instance ran. Dedicated hosts are physical EC2 servers dedicated for your use. Useful in environments that may not support multi-tenant virtualization, licensing that does not support cloud deployments, and can be purchased on demand. Instance types: FPGA, IOPS, G, graphics, H, high disk throughput, T, cheap and general purpose, D, density, R, RAM, M, main choice for general purpose apps, C, compute, P, graphics, PIX, X, extreme memory, Z, extreme CPU and memory, A, ARM, U, bare metal fight XAU. The numbers are the generation, and not important. When provisioning an EC2 instance, selecting availability zone is somewhat random. One of the first time you spin one up may differ to one of the next time. Monitoring by default every 5 minutes, more frequent monitoring requires that detailed monitoring be selected. Configure Security Group creates a virtual firewall. It is now possible to encrypt root storage volumes. Delete on termination is not selected by default on additional storage volumes. Root volumes are deleted on termination by default. Termination protection is turned off by default, must be manually selected. Security groups: any change on a security group takes effect immediately. The rules are stateful, so anything allowed in will also be allowed out. All outbound traffic is allowed by default. Cannot block ports or source addresses with security groups, or create deny rules, have to use NACLs instead. All inbound traffic is blocked by default though. And security groups are used to allow specific services either globally or from specified addresses. It is possible to add an EC2 instance to more than one security group, and any number of instances can be a member of a security group. EBS, Elastic Block Store. A virtual block storage volume in the cloud. Each volume is automatically replicated within its availability zone to protect against component failure. 5 types: general purpose, provisioned IOPS, throughput optimized HDD, cold HDD, EBS magnetic. General purpose, GP2 SSD is designed to balance price and performance. 16K IOPS per volume. Provisioned IOPS, IO1, SSD is for when IOPS requirement exceeds 16K per volume in the above, 64K IOPS. Throughput optimized, ST1, is for big data and data warehousing, frequent access and throughput intense 500 IOPS. Cold HDD, SC1, is for file servers, and is a low-cost HDD option for less frequent access 260 IOPS. EBS Magnetic, Standard, is a previous generation offering, but still available and for use cases where data is infrequently accessed 40 to 200 IOPS. EBS volumes will always be in the same availability zone as their related EC2 instance. EBS volumes can be made larger on the fly, but can take time to take effect. OS changes may be required, a repartitioning of the drive for all space to be usable. The root volume can have type changed to provisioned IOPS or magnetic, and can be increased in size, but not decreased, all on the fly. To move an EC2 instance or EBS volume to a different availability zone, take a snapshot. Create an image from the snapshot using hardware-assisted virtualization. Launch the AMI, Amazon Machine Image, and change the subnet for a different availability zone. The AMI can also be copied to a different region. That image can then be used to deploy EC2 instances to new regions. When an AMI is copied, then launched, the launch permissions, tags and Docker permissions are not inherited from the image. They must be manually applied. Snapshots exist in S3, point-in-time copies of volumes. If taking a snapshot of an EBS ROT volume, it is best practice to stop the related EC2 instance before taking the snapshot, but you can take the snapshot whilst it is running. Volumes must be detached before they can be deleted. By default, when an EC2 instance is terminated, the root volume will be deleted but additional volumes will not. EBS versus instance store. AMIs can be selected based on region, OS, 64x or 32x, launch permissions or storage of root device, instance store, ephemeral storage, or EBS-backed volume. For EBS volumes, the root device is launched from an EBS volume created from an EBS snapshot. For instance, store the root device is launched from an AMI instance store volume from a template in S3. If you build an EC2 instance from an instance store AMI and want to add additional instance store volumes, it can only be done during initial setup. On the instances created, only EBS volumes can be added. Instance store-backed instances can only be rebooted or terminated, they cannot be stopped. This also means you cannot stop and start to move hypervisor in the event of issues. Hypervisor failure means the loss of the system and all data. NE versus ENA versus Bowery Fold. NE, Elastic Network Interface, a virtual NIC. N is Enhanced Networking, ENA is a subtype, uses single root I/O virtualization to provide high-performance networking. Bowery Fold is Elastic Fabric Adapter, which is a network device you can attach to an EC2 instance to accelerate high-performance computing, HPC, and machine learning applications. Use NE for additional non-production networks, for using network and security appliances in your VPC, for creating dual-homed instances, or to create a low-budget, high-availability solution. Enhanced networking is a method of device virtualization for higher I/O performance and lower CPU compared to traditional network interfaces. Provides higher bandwidth and lower latency. No additional charge, though EC2 instance does have to support it. ENA supports network speeds of up to 100 gigabits per second. Older instances may use Intel 82599 Virtual Function, VF, which is limited to 10 gigabits per second. Chose ENA over VF. HPC applications and machine learning, always choose Elastic Fabric Adapter. These bypass the OS, Linux only, for lower latency and improved performance. Encrypted root device volumes and snapshots. Root volumes can now be encrypted on creation. To encrypt an unencrypted root volume, take a snapshot, copy the snapshot but choose to encrypt the copy, create an image from the encrypted snapshot and use the image to launch a new EC2 instance. You cannot take an encrypted image and build it on a non-encrypted volume. Volumes restored from encrypted snapshots are encrypted automatically, as are snapshots of encrypted volumes. Snapshots can be shared with other AWS accounts, or made public, but only if unencrypted. CloudWatch is a monitoring service for AWS resources and apps running on AWS. It can monitor compute, auto-scaling groups, elastic load balancers, Route 53 health checks, storage and CDN, EBS volumes, storage gateways and CloudFront. CloudWatch and EC2 host-level metrics can be monitored such as CPU, network, disk, status check. CloudWatch will monitor EC2 every 5 minutes by default. Detailed logging can bring this down to 1 minute. CloudWatch can use alarms to trigger notifications. CloudTrail increases visibility of user and resource activity by recording AWS Management Console actions and API calls. Use CloudTrail to identify users and accounts called AWS, source IPs and time/date. CloudWatch is all about performance, CloudTrail is all about auditing. Detailed monitoring can be enabled during instance creation, or afterwards via the action menu. Standard metrics are CPU, disk and network. Anything beyond standard display requires custom metric configuration. Notification alarms can be set for specific metrics, RAM and CPU utilization for example. Emails sent when a specific threshold is reached for a defined period. Dashboards can be created for monitoring metrics, either regionally or globally. Logs can be sent to, aggregated and stored in CloudWatch. Events can be set up to give near real-time views of state changes. AWS Command Line, CLI, is global, and programmatic access is required for a user account to execute command line. Command line commands are not in the exam, but basic commands are useful, so a review is recommended. IAM roles. Assign a role from EC2 Actions menu, create a role with necessary permissions which will then permit use of the command line without the storage of credentials in the user home drive. AWS Directory. Roles are easier to manage than access keys on multiple systems, as well as more secure. They can be assigned to an EC2 instance after creation and they are universal. They can be used in any region. Bootstrap scripts can be used to pipe in command line bash scripts during startup. Can be very powerful. EC2 instance metadata, used to get information about an instance, curl http://169.254.169.254/latest/metadata. Can also get bootstrap information from /user data. EFS, Elastic File System. A service for EC2 that creates a shareable volume that will automatically grow and shrink as data is added and removed. Only pay for what you remove. EFS can be accessed by more than one EC2 instance. On creation, an EFS volume is added to the default security group and default VPC. Stored across multiple availability zones within a region with read-after-write consistency. EFS supports the NFS4 protocol, and can support thousands of concurrent connections. FSX provides a fully managed native MS Windows file system to enable the move of Windows-based apps to AWS. It is built on Windows Server. So essentially a Windows file server. SMB-based and supports AD users, ACLS, groups and security policies, as well as DFS namespaces and replication. Choose FSX for Windows System Access and SMB. EFS is a managed NAS file system for EC2 based on NFS, one of the first network file sharing protocols native to Unix and Linux. Choose EFS for Linux shared storage. Amazon FSX for Lustre is as standard FSX but optimized for compute-intensive workloads, high-performance computing, machine learning, media processing and electronic design automation. Can process massive datasets with hundreds of Gbps throughput, millions of IOPS and sub-millisecond latency. FSX for Lustre can store direct in S3. EC2 placement groups. 3 types: clustered placement groups, spread placement groups and partitioned placement groups. Clustered placement groups are groups of instances within a single availability zone, ideal for apps that need low latency, high throughput, or both by keeping instances close together. Only certain instances can be launched into clustered placement groups. Spread placement groups are groups of instances all placed on distinct hardware with separate networking and power in separate racks. Better for resilience. Can also be across multiple availability zones within a region. Use for individual critical EC2 instances. Has a limitation of a maximum of 7 instances per availability zone. Partition placement groups are similar to the above, but you can have multiple EC2 instances in each partition within a placement group. Each partition is a separate rack with its own power and networking, so any hardware failure impact is limited to a partition. Good for multiple instances in each location, HDFS, base and Cassandra. Can also be across multiple availability zones within a region. Names for placement groups must be unique within your AWS account. Only compute optimized, GPU, memory optimized, and storage optimized instances can be put in placement groups. AWS recommend the same EC2 instance types for use in clustered placement groups. Placement groups cannot be merged. An existing EC2 instance can be moved to a placement group provided it is in a stopped state. This can be done from the CLI or SDK, but not from the console currently. Amazon Wave, a web application firewall that lets you monitor HTTP and HTTPS requests that are forwarded to CloudFront, an application load balancer or API gateway. AWS Wave also lets you control access to your content. An application layer 7 firewall. Firewall config including source IPs, which query string parameters are allowed to pass to the receiving service. The load balancer, API gateway or CloudFront will then allow or 403 the traffic. Wave has 3 basic behavior types: allow everything except things you block, block all except those you allow, or count the requests made that match properties specified. Protections can be configured based on elements of web requests such as the IP or country a request comes from, values in request headers, strings in requests either specific or regex, the length of requests, the presence of SQL code likely to be malicious or a script likely to be malicious. If you want to block malicious IPs, use a way for network ACLs. To block SQL, scripts etc., use WAF. AWS Solution Architect Associate. Chapter 5, Databases. ADS, Relational Database Services. A relational database is a bit like giant spreadsheet with tables, rows and fields. Relational databases on AWS can be MS SQL, Oracle, MySQL, PostgreSQL, Amazon Aurora or MariaDB. 2 key features: multi-availability zones, for resilience and disaster recovery, and read replicas for performance. Multi-as, in the event of failure AWS will detect and update DNS, redirecting a traffic to an alternate location for the database. In read replica, all writes are replicated to the replica. In the event of failure there is no automatic recovery, EC2 instances would need to be updated to reference the new location. The read replica option is useful to spread read load across the replicas. Configure EC2 instances to connect across the replicas, up to 5 copies of a DB. ADS provisioned IOPS storage with SQL Server, 16 TB ADS volume limit. You can force failover to another availability zone for ADS with a reboot with failover. Non-relational DBs. Collections equals tables, document equals row, key value pairs equals fields/columns. Data warehousing is used for business intelligence. Tools like Cognos, Jaspersoft, SQL Server reporting services, Oracle Hyperion, SAP NetWeaver. used to pull in large and complex datasets. Online transaction processing differs from online analytics processing differs in terms of the queries types run. OLTP will pull up an order number and display all values relevant to it. OLAP can pull in a huge number of records, example, profit in a specific region for a specific product range. All orders would need to be queried for location and product, values collated and interpreted. Data warehousing databases use a different type of architecture both from a DB and infrastructure perspective. DynamoDB is Amazon's NoSQL solution. DynamoDB can support binary objects up to 400 kilobits. DynamoDB is automatically replicates across ASs. Redshift is Amazon's data warehousing solution for OLAP. Elasticache is a service to deploy, operate and scale an in-memory cache in the cloud. The service improves performance of web applications by allowing retrieval of information from memory caches instead of relying on disks. Elasticache can take a huge load off the database for frequent identical queries. Elasticache supports two open-source in-memory caching engines, Memcached and Redis. AWS database create does not give a DB a name by default, meaning you have to use admin tools to connect to add one. Easier just to do it in setup via advanced options. AWS runs on virtual machines, but you do not have access to them for patching or anything else. AWS is not serverless, though there is serverless Aurora. If you want your application to check AWS for an error, have it look for an error node in the response from the Amazon AWS API. AWS backups, multi-as and read replicas. Two different types of ROADS backups. Automated backups and snapshots. Automated backups allow you to recover your DB to any point in time within the retention period of 35 days. An automated backup is a full daily snapshot, plus transaction logs throughout the day. By restoring the most recent daily backup plus transaction logs, it is possible to restore to any point down to a second within the retention period. Automated backups are on by default, and stored in S3. Storage is free up to the size of your DB. Backups are taken within a window, and during the backup storage I/O may be suspended. Latency may also be elevated. Snapshots are point in time and manual. They are stored even after the AWS instance is deleted, unlike automated backups. When you select to delete an AWS instance, you will be asked if you want to take a final snapshot. Whenever you restore a database from automated backup or snapshot, the restored version will be a new AWS instance with a new DNS endpoint. Encryption at rest is available for MySQL, Oracle, SQL Server, PostgreSQL, MariaDB and Aurora using the AWS Key Management Service. Once the AWS instance is encrypted, the data stored in underlying storage is encrypted, as are automated backups, read replicas and snapshots. Multi-as allows you to have an exact copy of your production DB in another AS. All changes are simultaneously replicated to the standby DB in another AS. In the event of primary failure, AWS will automatically fail over to the standby without admin intervention. Multi-as is for resiliency and Docker only, not performance. Available for SQL, Oracle, MySQL, PostgreSQL, MariaDB. Aurora has its own fault tolerance by design. Multi-as may make your DB slower, and do it in a scheduled maintenance window. A read replica is one or more copies of a production DB, which are kept in sync with the production DB. You can have read replicas of read replicas, watch for latency, and the read replica can be promoted to a standalone DB, though that breaks replication. Read replicas allow you to keep read-only copies of production DBs to improve the performance of read-heavy workloads by distributing connections to them. Available for Oracle, MySQL, PostgreSQL, MariaDB. Aurora. Read replicas are for scaling, not Docker. Automatic backups are required to deploy a read replica. You can have up to 5 read replica copies of any DB. Each read replica will have its own DNS endpoint. You can have read replicas with multi-as, and can have read replicas in a second region. Easy way to migrate to Aurora: just take a read replica to Aurora from the Actions menu. You can force multi as failover by rebooting with failover. Read replica has a master and a replica. The replica can be promoted to a primary. DynamoDB is a fast and flexible NoSQL solution for applications that need consistent and single-digit latency at any scale. Fully managed, and supports both document and key-value data models. The flexible data model make it a great fit for mobile, web, gaming, AdTech, IoT and many others. DynamoDB is stored on SSD, spread across 3 geographically distinct data centers. 2 modes of operation: eventually consistent reads as default, or strongly consistent reads. Eventual consistent reads see consistency across all copies of data usually within a second. Repeating a read after a short time should return the updated data, best read performance. Strongly consistent reads return results that reflect all writes that received a successful response prior to the read. If your app is okay with 1 second lag with update, eventual is sufficient. Redshift is Amazon's fast and powerful data warehousing service in the cloud. Start from as little as 25 cents per hour with no upfront cost or commitment, and scale to a petabyte or more for $1,000 per terabyte per year. Much cheaper than most other solutions. OLAP, online analytics processing, multiple queries against different datasets, plus calculations. Redshift can be configured as a single node up to 160 GB, or multi-node. Multi-node has a leader node to manage client connections and receive queries, and the compute nodes store data and perform the queries and computations. You can have up to 128 compute nodes. Redshift uses columnar compression, making it more efficient and able to compress more owing to the sequential nature of the storage. Redshift does not require indexes or materialized views, so uses less space. Redshift will automatically select the most appropriate compression scheme based on samples of data. Massively parallel processing, MPP. Redshift automatically distributes data and query load across all nodes. Redshift makes it easy to add nodes to your data warehouse and enables you to maintain fast query performance as data grows. Redshift backups are enabled by default with a 1-day retention. Backups can be retained up to 35 days. Redshift will always attempt to maintain at least 3 copies of your data, the original and a replica on the compute nodes and a backup in S3. Redshift can also replicate backups in S3 to another region for drive. Redshift is priced on compute node hours, 1 unit per node per hour. Not charged for leader node. Also charged for backups and data transfer within a VPC. Comms with Redshift are always SSL, and data at rest is always ICE 256. By default, it manages the keys, though HSMs or the key management service can also be used. Redshift is only available in one AS, but it can be restored to another in the event of failure. Amazon Aurora. Aurora is a MySQL and PostgreSQL compatible relational database engine that combines the speed and availability of high-end commercial databases with the simplicity and cost-effectiveness of open-source databases. Up to 5x better performance than MySQL, 3x better than PostgreSQL at a much lower price with similar availability. Aurora starts with 10 GB and scales in 10 GB increments to 64 TB with storage auto-scaling. Compute can scale to 32 GB and 244 GB of memory. 2 copies of your data is contained in each availability zone with a minimum of 3 availability zones. 6 copies of the data. Aurora is designed to handle 2 data copy failures without impact to write, and up to 3 with no impact to read. Aurora storage is also self-healing, data blocks and disks are continuously scanned for errors and repaired automatically. 3 types of Aurora replica. Aurora replicas, you can have 15, MySQL replicas, of which you can have 5, and PostgreSQL which is currently limited to 1. These are red replicas. Aurora replicas are more performant in all respects. Aurora can only have replicas within a region, where MySQL replicas can be in different regions. Aurora is also guaranteed against data loss in failover. Automated failover is only available with Aurora replicas. Automated backups always enabled on Aurora. You can also take snapshot, both without impact on performance. Snapshots can be shared with other accounts. Aurora Serverless is an on-demand auto-scaling configuration for the MySQL-compatible and PostgreSQL-compatible editions of Aurora. An Aurora Serverless DB cluster automatically starts up, shuts down and scales capacity as required based on application needs. Fantastic for infrequent, intermittent or unpredictable workloads. Cost is only incurred when the instance is active, so if you need high performance at a low cost, look at Aurora Serverless. You can create an Aurora read replica from an AWS database, then promote the replica to complete the migration to Aurora. You can also take a snapshot of a database, and restore it to Aurora. ElastiCake is a web service that makes it easy to deploy, operate and scale an in-memory cache in the cloud. The service improves the performance of web applications by allowing retrieval of information from fast in-memory caches, instead of relying entirely on slower disk-based databases. Available backed by Memcached or Redis. Memcached is simple and scales horizontally for improved performance. Redis offers advanced data types, rank and sort, publishing and subscribing, multiple ASs, persistence and backup/restore options. AWS Solution Architect Associate. Chapter 6, Route 53 DNS. Elastic load balancers do not have predefined IPv4 addresses, you resolve to them using DNS names. Alias records can be used for root domains, aka Apex or naked domains, CNAMEs cannot. Given the choice in the exam, always pick an alias record. You can buy and register domains in Route 53, but they can take 3 days to register. You can then create records in the namespace as required. Routing policies, simple routing, weighted routing, latency-based routing, failover routing, geolocation routing, geo-proximity routing, traffic flow only, multi-value answer routing. Simple routing policy is one record with multiple IP addresses. In the event of a query, all options are returned to a user in a random order, so like DNS round robin. Simply create a record and add multiple addresses against it on separate lines. Cannot use health checks. Weighted routing policies allow traffic to be split according to assigned weighting percentages, with Route 53 managing the distribution of the traffic. Create multiple separate records for a particular host name, and assign each a traffic percentage weight and set ID, label. You can also create health checks to monitor the availability of the records, and choose whether the records are subject to health checks. If a record fails a health check, it will be removed from Route 53 until it passes. You can also set up notifications from health checks. Latency-based routing enables routing based on lowest latency for each user to give them the fastest response. You create a record in each region where your resource exists. When Route 53 receives a query, it selects the latency resource record set for the region with the lowest latency for that user and passes it back to the user. Failover routing policies, used to create an active/passive setup. Route 53 will monitor the primary site with a health check, and failover to the secondary if the primary becomes unresponsive to health check. The secondary does not have to be associated with a health check, since it is the failover option. Only works for 2 records in a pair. Geolocation routing policies. Geolocation routing allows you to choose where traffic will be sent based on the location of the user. Latency-based routing gives performant results, but geolocation assures the destination host for users in a specific location. Location can be expressed in continent or country. Geo-proximity routing, traffic flow only, routes based on the location of your users and resources. You can choose to route more or less traffic to a location by specifying a bias value. The bias expands or shrinks based on the size of the location the user traffic came from. To use geo-proximity routing, you must use Route 53 traffic flow. Multi-value answer policies, the same as simple routing, but you can add health checks to each record set. Only healthy records get returned to queries. Elastic load balancers do not have IP addresses, so always use CNAMEs to reference them. There is a limit of 50 domains, but that limit can be increased by contacting support. AWS Solution Architect Associate. Chapter 7, VPCs. Virtual Private Cloud lets you provision a logically isolated section of the AWS cloud where you can launch resources in a virtual network you define. You have complete control over the environment, including selection of IP address range. One subnet equals one availability zone. You cannot have a subnet across availability zones, but you can have multiple subnets within an availability zone. Creation of subnets, configuration of routing tables and gateways or IGWs. Network config is easy to customize. You can create a hardware VPN between your corporate data center and AWS, to use the AWS cloud as an extension of your DC. Use network ACLs as a first line of defense, as they allow specific blocking and are stateless. Security groups are next, and stateful. A Bastion server is an EC2 instance in a public subnet, used to connect to an instance in a private subnet. What do VPCs let you do? Launch instances into a subnet of our choosing, selecting custom IP addresses. Configure routing tables between subnets, create internet gateways and attach to VPC. Better security control over AWS resources, instance security groups, subnet network ACLs. Default VPC is very easy and allows immediate deployment of instances. All subnets in a default VPC are internet accessible. Each EC2 instance has a public and private IP. By default, you can have 5 VPCs in each AWS region. VPC peering allows connection of 2 VPCs using private IPs. You can peer with other accounts, as well as within your own. There is no transitive peering. One VPC is connected to others, so A connects to B and C, but if A connects to B which connects to C, A will not have access to C. Peering has to be direct point-to-point. Also possible to peer between regions. When a new VPC is created, no subnets are created automatically, no internet gateway, but there is a routing table, a default network ACL and security group. A subnet cannot span more than one availability zone. Auto-assign public IP address by default is off on subnet creation. 5 addresses are reserved in a subnet by was, 0 for the network, 1 for the router, 2 for the DNS server, 3 for future use and 253 for broadcast. Only one internet gateway per VPC. All new subnets not assigned to a specific route are added to the main route by default. It is therefore best practice to make the main route private and non-internet connected so as to avoid making everything publicly accessible by default. Security groups do not span VPCs. As are randomized across accounts, so US East 1A might be different on your account to somebody else's. NAT instances versus NAT gateways. A NAT instance is an EC2 system, which therefore needs to be patched and managed. A NAT gateway is a highly available gateway to allow systems communicate with the Internet without becoming public. NAT instance, remember to disable source/destination checks on your EC2 instance. A NAT instance must be able to send and receive traffic when the source or destination is not itself. A NAT instance must be in a public subnet. There must be a route out of the public subnet. NAT instances are a bottleneck, can increase instance size, and single point of failure. High availability zones can be created using auto-scaling groups, multiple subnets in different ASes and a script to automate failover. NAT instances are always behind a security group. NAT gateways are redundant inside an availability zone, but you can only have one gateway in an AS less than and cannot span ASes. They have a throughput of 5 gigabits per second, scaling automatically to 45 gigabits per second. No need to patch OS, and NAT gateways are not associated with security groups. NAT gateways are auto-assigned a public IP. Just update the routing table for 0.0.0.000 to use the NAT gateway for internet connectivity. If you only have a NAT gateway in one AS, and that AS fails, you risk losing internet connectivity. Consider a NAT gateway per AS, and configure routing to use the local AS. Network access control lists versus security groups. Network ACLs are associated with VPCs, and can only be associated with a single VPC. On creation of a new network ACL, everything in and out is denied. A VPC comes with a default NACL which allows everything in and out. Custom NACLs can be created, which by default block everything in and out. A subnet can only be associated with an NACL. Associating a subnet with a NACL breaks association with previous NACL. Rule numbers are recommended to increment by 100 each time. With NACLs being stateless, outbound rules need to be manually created to match inbound. Ephemeral ports, 1024 to 65,535. Short-lived ports for transactions between servers. Receiving service normally static. This is done to permit return traffic, and are only valid for the duration of communication. A NAT gateway uses ephemeral ports 1024 to 65,535. Network ACLs are processed in order, so deny rules must be listed before allow. Subnets on creation will be associated with the default VPC NACL if no other assignment is provided, but can be associated with another you create. They can only be associated with one NACL at any one time. NACLs are evaluated before security groups. Block source IPs with NACLs, not security groups. NACLs can deny or allow, and are stateless. Custom VPCs and elastic load balancers. A load balancer needs at least 2 public subnets with internet gateways. VPC flow logs capture information going to and from network interfaces in your VPC. Flow log data is stored using CloudWatch logs, so after creation the logs can be consumed via CloudWatch, can also be stored in S3. Flow logs at 3 levels: VPC, subnet or network interface. You cannot enable flow logs for VPCs that are paired with your VPC, unless both are in the same AWS account. Flow logs can be tagged. After a flow log is created, its configuration cannot be changed. Cannot change IAM role. DNS traffic is not logged, unless an external DNS server is used. Traffic generated by Windows for Amazon Windows license activation is also not monitored. Traffic from 189.254.169.254 for metadata is not monitored, nor is DHCP or traffic to the reserved IP of the default VPC router. Bastion hosts are servers that are designed to withstand attack. Usually available on the internet and used for remote access to systems on the private network. A NAT gateway is used to provide internet traffic to EC2 instances in private subnets. You cannot use a NAT gateway as a Bastion host. Direct Connect makes it easy to establish a connection from your premises to AWS, reducing cost, increasing bandwidth and providing a more consistent experience. Useful for high throughput and security. Customer connects to a router owned by them in a direct connection, DX location. AWS partner router also possible, that connects from one cage to an AWS dedicated cage router over cross-connect, which connects to AWS over the backbone. Never traverses the internet. Steps to set up a VPN over Direct Connect. Create a virtual interface in the Direct Connect console. This is public virtual. Go to the VPC console VPN connections and create a customer gateway. Create a virtual private gateway. Attach the virtual private gateway to the desired VPC. Select VPN connections and create a new VPN connection. Select the virtual private gateway and the customer gateway. Once VPN is available, set up the VPN on the customer gateway or firewall. Global Accelerator. Create accelerators to improve availability and performance of applications used by a global audience. By default, Global Accelerator provides you with 2 public IP addresses that you associate with the accelerator. You can also bring your own. User connects to Edge Location, which connects to the AWS Global Accelerators. They then decide which endpoint group to send the traffic to based on proximity, endpoint health and weighting. Onward to endpoint groups, and finally endpoints. Global Accelerator includes the following components: static IP addresses, accelerator, DNS name, network zone, listener, endpoint group, endpoint. On creation, Global Accelerator assigns each accelerator a DNS name that points to the static IPs assigned. You can route to it by name or IP, or create your own DNS records to point to the accelerator. A Global Accelerator network zone is like an AS for Global Accelerator. It services the static IPs for your accelerator from a unique subnet. It is an isolated unit with its own physical infrastructure. If one of the 2 addresses becomes unavailable, clients can retry on the other. A listener processes inbound connections from clients to Global Accelerator based on port or port range and protocol. Supports both TCP and UDP. Each listener has 1 or more endpoint groups, and traffic is forwarded to endpoints in one of the groups. You associate endpoint groups with listeners by specifying the regions that you want to distribute traffic to. Traffic is distributed to optimal endpoints. Each endpoint group is associated with a region, and each group includes 1 or more endpoints in a region. You can adjust the of traffic by using the traffic dial setting. The traffic dial enables easy performance testing for new releases across regions. Endpoints can be network load balancers, application load balancers, EC2 instances, or elastic IP addresses. An application load balancer endpoint can be internet-facing or internal. Traffic is routed to endpoints based on configs such as endpoint weight to specify the proportion of traffic routed to each. Weight can be up to 255. You can configure an accelerator to always direct a source IP to a specific endpoint to maintain affinity. Accelerators must be disabled before deletion. VPC endpoints enable you to connect your VPC to supported AWS services and VPN endpoint services powered by private link, without an Internet gateway, NAT device, VPN connection or AWS direct connection. Instances in your VPC do not require public IPs to communicate with resources if the service, as traffic between your VPC and the service does not leave the Amazon network. Endpoints are virtual devices, horizontally scaled, redundant and highly available. 2 types of VPC endpoint, interfaces and gateways. An interface endpoint is an elastic network interface with a private IP that serves as an entry point for AWS-supported services. Gateway endpoints are supported by S3 and DynamoDB. AWS Solution Architect Associate. Chapter 8, High Availability. AWS Load Balancer Types, Application, Network, and Classic. Application load balancers are Layer 7 and application-aware, used primarily for HTTP/HTTPS and are more intelligent than classic load balancers. Network load balancers are used for TCP load balancing where extreme network performance is required, operating at the Layer 4 connection layer. They can handle millions of requests per second at very low latency. Also provide static IPs. A classic load balancer is a legacy elastic load balancer. You can load balance HTTP/HTTPS and use Layer 7 features like X forwarding and sticky sessions, but classic load balancers are not application aware. You can use strict Layer 4 load balancing for apps that purely rely on TCP. If an app stops responding, a classic load balancer will respond with a 504 error. A 504 means a problem with the application, not the load balancer. Logged IPs come from the load balancer. To find the originating client IP, look for the X forwarded for header in logs. An internal load balancer is configured within a private subnet. Advanced config lets you choose which subnet to deploy into. No IP given for a classic or application load balancer, always addressed via DNS. Instances monitored by ELB are always either in service or out of service. Advanced load balancer theory. Sticky sessions allow you to bind a user session to a specific EC2 instance, instead of the classic load balancer behavior of routing each request to the instance with the smallest load. Sticky sessions can also be enabled for application load balancers, but traffic will be sent to the target group level. Cross-zone load balancing enables load balancers to distribute traffic to destinations across ASes, resulting in an event distribution across the endpoints. Without it, traffic would only be split at the AS level, which depending on the number of endpoints in each AS could result in an uneven distribution beyond AS level. Path patterns. You can create a listener with rules to forward requests based on the URL path. This is known as path-based routing. You can run general requests to one target group and requests to render images to another, for example. Autoscaling has three components: groups, configuration templates, and scaling options. Groups are logical collections of services, app servers, web servers or DB servers for example. Groups use a configuration template to specify AMI ID, instance type, key pair, security group and block device mapping, basically all the elements required to start up an EC2 instance. The conditions on which a group scales, either based on the occurrence of specific conditions or to a schedule. 5 scaling options: maintain current instance levels at all times. If an unhealthy instance is found, it will be replaced. Scale manually. All you specify is the number of instances. Auto-scaling makes the necessary changes to instances. Scale based on schedule. Scaling actions performed automatically on a schedule you set. Useful to respond to a predictable pattern. Scale on demand. Most popular, scales in response to demand thresholds being met. CPU or RAM utilization for example. Use predictive scaling. Predictive scaling uses previous performance indicators to predict when scaling is required, and respond accordingly. Use EC2 scaling and AWS scaling combined to scale resources across multiple services to maintain optimal availability and performance. Autoscaling will distribute instances across availability zones in the same manner as the instances being replaced. If you delete an autoscaling group, the instances created by it are also automatically deleted, terminated. SAA architecture, always plan for failure. CloudFormation, automatically scripted build infrastructure stacks, with sample templates available. Quick Start gives access to some very complicated deployments. Rollback, specify alarms for CloudFront to monitor. Changes will be rolled back by CloudFormation if these alarm thresholds are crossed. AWS Elastic Beanstalk, designed for developers to easily deploy basic services with a single click and no AWS knowledge. It can also be scaled easily. You upload your code, AWS analyzes it and figures out what it needs to deploy. Elastic Beanstalk will handle the details of capacity provisioning, load balancing, scaling and application health monitoring. AWS Solution Architect Associate. Chapter 9, AWS Applications. SQS, Simple Queue Service. A message queue that can be used to store messages while waiting for a computer to process them. A distributed queue system that enables web service applications to quickly and reliably queue messages that one component in the application generates to be consumed by another. It is a temporary repository for messages that await processing. Using SQS you can decouple application components to run independently, and any component can store messages in fail-safe queues. Messages can contain up to 256 kilobytes of text in any format, and any component can retrieve them programmatically using the SQS API. The messages can go beyond the 256 kilobytes, but are then stored in S3. 2 queue types. Standard queues and FIFO queues. Standard is default, almost unlimited message per second and guarantee delivery at least once. More than one message may be delivered, and they may be delivered out of order, though they provide best effort ordering. Not a guarantee. If an app cannot cope with multiple copies of a message or messages out of sequence, use FIFO. FIFO assures messages will be delivered in order, message preserved until a consumer processes and deletes it. No duplicates. FIFO also supports message groups that allow multiple ordered message groups in a single queue. FIFO is limited to 300 transactions per second, but have all the capabilities of standard queues. SQS is pull, not push. Need an ECS instance polling the queue. Messages are kept in the queue between 1 minute and 14 days. The default is 4 days. Visibility timeout, the amount of time a message is invisible in the queue after a reader picks it up. Provided the job is processed before the timeout expires, the message is deleted. If not, it becomes visible again, which is what can result in the same message being delivered twice. The visibility timeout can be increased up to 12 hours to overcome this. SQS regular short polling returns immediately, long polling doesn't return a response until a message arrives in the queue, or the long poll times out. You can reduce EC2 poll cost by using long polling. Long polling is configured in seconds. Anywhere you see decoupling, think SQSS. Simple Workflow Service, SWF, is a web service used to coordinate work across different components. It enables a wide range of use cases including media processing, web application backends, business process workflows and analytics pipelines to be designed as a coordination of tasks. Tasks represent the invocation of processing steps by code, web calls, human interaction and scripts. SWF is a way to combine the digital with manual tasks. Used in the Amazon warehouse to deal with picking and packing an incoming web order. SWF workflows can last up to 1 year. SWF is task-oriented, SQS is message-oriented. SWF ensures a task is only assigned once, SQS you have to deal with possible multiple messages, FAFO. SWF keeps track of events in an application, where in SQS you have to implement your own app-level tracking, especially if you're using multiple queues. SWF Actor, workflow starter that initiate a process, a website for instance, and deciders that control the flow of the execution. In the event of failure, deciders decide what to do next. Activity workers carry out the activity tasks. Actors equals SWF, messages equals SQS. SNS, Simple Notification Service. Makes it easy to set up, operate and send notifications from the cloud. Easy and cost-effective to send messages from an application to users, or other apps. You can do push notifications to Apple/Google/Windows/Android and to China via Baidu Cloud Push. Can also deliver SMS texts, or email via SQS, or to any HTTP endpoint. Can group multiple endpoints using topics. A topic is an access point for allowing recipients to subscribe to copies of notifications. A topic can support multiple client types, and SNS will format the messages appropriately for each type. All messages stored across availability zones. SNS benefits: push-based, no polling, simple APIs, flexible message delivery, inexpensive pay-as-you-go, web-based console and point-and-click interface. Elastic transcoder, media transcoder in the cloud to convert from original source to other formats. Presets for popular output formats. Pay based on minutes transcoding and the resolution transcoded at. API Gateway, a fully managed service that makes it easy for devs to publish, maintain, monitor and secure APIs at any scale. Users connect to API Gateway, who are then redirected to Lambda, EC2, DynamoDB or whatever AWS service is appropriate to the API and application. API Gateway can expose HTTPS endpoints to define a RESTful API, serverlessly connect to services like Lambda and DynamoDB. It can also send each API endpoint to a different target. Runs at very low cost and scales automatically. Usage can be tracked and controlled with API keys. Requests can be throttled to prevent attack, and can be CloudWatch connected for monitoring. Also enables maintenance of multiple API versions. Define an API. Define resources and nested resources, HTTP paths, then set HTTP methods, get, put etc., set security and choose targets in EC2 or Lambda etc. Set request and response transformations. Deployed to a stage, using API Gateway domain by default, although custom domains can be used. It now supports AWS Certificate Manager for free SSL certs. API caching is a way to cache an endpoint response to reduce the number of calls made, as well as latency. When caching is enabled for a stage, API Gateway caches responses for a specified TTL in seconds. Same origin policy. A browser allows a script in a web page to access data in a second web page, but only if both have the same origin to prevent cross-site scripting attacks, XSS. Some tools, like curl and Postman, ignore the convention. CORS can be used to overcome the same origin policy from a server point of view. It is CORS that enables data to be served from an EC2 instance that may exist in S3, for example. Browser makes an HTTP options call, the server responds with a list of domains approved for the action. An error origin policy cannot be read at the remote resource. Means CORS needs to be enabled on the API gateway. Kinesis. Streaming data is data that is generated continuously by thousands of data sources, typically sent simultaneously and small in size. Kinesis is a platform on AWS to send streaming data to, making it easy to load and analyze, providing the ability to build custom apps. Kinesis streams, data producers stream data to Kinesis. Kinesis streams stores the data for 24 hours by default, up to 7 days possible. Data is contained in shards, typically a shard per data type. A shard can handle 5 transactions per second for read, up to 2 megabytes per second and up to 1000 records per second for writes, up to 1 megabyte per second including partition keys. The data capacity of the stream is a function of the number of shards specified in a stream. The total capacity of the stream is the sum of the capacities of its shards. EC2 can analyze shards and then store it in DynamoDB, S3, EMR, ADS or whatever. Kinesis Streams allows persistent storage of stream data for 24 hours to 7 days. Shards equals Kinesis Streams. Kinesis Firehose, producers send data streams to Kinesis Firehose. No persistent storage, data has to be processed immediately, usually by a Lambda function which outputs to S3 and onto whatever. Kinesis Analytics can analyze data on the fly from either Streams or Firehose, before passing output to S3, Redshift or Elastic Cluster. Web Identity Federation and Cognito. Access AWS resources after auth with web-based providers like Amazon, Facebook or Google. Cognito is the AWS service for this. Cognito allows sign up and sign into apps, access for guests, brokers the identity transaction so you don't need to write the auth code, syncs data across multiple user devices. It is recommended for all mobile application AWS services. The recommended approach is to have a user send an auth request to their chosen provider, be given an access token which is presented to Cognito, which then grants access to the AWS app. Cognito provides temporary credentials that map to an IAM role, allowing access to the required resources. No need for apps to embed or store AWS credentials locally on the device, and it gives users a seamless experience across devices. Use pools are user directories used to manage sign up and sign in for mobile and web apps. Users can sign in directly to the user pool or using Facebook, Amazon or Google. Cognito acts as identity broker between the provider and AWS. Successful auth generates a JSON Web Token, JWT. Identity pools provide temporary AWS credentials to access AWS services like S3 or DynamoDB. Cognito tracks the association between user identity and the devices they sign in from. Push synchronization is used to push updates and sync user data across multiple devices. Cognito uses SNS to send a notification to all the devices associated with a given user identity whenever data stored in the cloud changes. User pools are user-based for login etc. Identity pools authorize access to AWS resources. AWS Solution Architect Associate. Chapter 10, Serverless. Lambda is a compute service where you upload code and create a function. Lambda will provision and manage servers for running the code and you don't have to interact with servers at all. Lambda can be used as an event-driven compute service where Lambda runs code in response to events, triggers, could be a change in an S3 bucket or DB table. It can also be used as a compute service to run code in response to HTTP requests using API gateway or API calls from AWS SDKs. Always have API gateway at the front for serverless, then Lambda functions hitting a backend database. DynamoDB and Aurora Serverless are the serverless options, S3 bucket or other destination. Lambda will spool up an instance for every user independently on demand. One-to-one scaling, it scales out, no up. Lambda supports Node.js, Java, Python, C#, Go, and PowerShell. Lambda priced per request, memory. First million are free, then 20 cents per million. Also billed on duration of request. Lambda is great because there are no server, no need to manage them. Continuous scaling and super cheap. Lambda, DynamoDB, Aurora Serverless, API Gateway and S3 are serverless. Lambda functions can trigger other Lambda functions. AWS Array allows you to debug serverless applications. Lambda can do things globally, such as backup up S3 backups to other S3 buckets. Know your triggers. Lambda create functions, blueprints and application repository have loads of examples for Alexa skills you can build without knowing any code. Good luck in the exam.